The entire philosophy fits in 4 words. Patanjali wrote it in the 2nd sutra of the 1st chapter, in Sanskrit, in the precise, compressed, deliberately minimal language that the sutra form requires. 4 words that contain everything the text is about, that every subsequent sutra is elaborating, that the entire tradition of classical yoga is trying to transmit. Yogas Chitta, Vritti, Nirodhah. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Not the poses, not the stretching, not the physical practice that fills studios across the Western world and that has produced a multi-billion-dollar industry organized around the improvement of the body. The word yoga in Patanjali means union, the specific, experiential, directly available union of the individual awareness with the ground of awareness itself, which becomes possible when the mind's constant fluctuation temporarily stills. And the fluctuations, Chitta Vritti, are what you know from the inside, the commentary that never stops, the planning and remembering and judging and comparing and worrying and imagining and rehearsing, the mind that cannot stay with a single object for 30 seconds before it is moved to 3 others. The completely ordinary, completely relentless, completely exhausting movement of a mind that has not yet been given the tools to be still. The Yoga Sutras are the tools, compiled by a sage named Patanjali, possibly one person, possibly a name attached to a tradition, around 2,000 years ago in India. 196 sutras across 4 chapters, the most systematic, most practical, most completely unsexy manual for working with the mind that any tradition has ever produced. There is a problem that most people in midlife recognize immediately when it is named, and that almost no one has an adequate solution for: the mind that will not be still. Not in the dramatic sense, not the mind in acute crisis, the mind in grief, the mind in the kind of difficulty that commands the full attention and makes the ordinary background noise temporarily irrelevant. The ordinary mind, the mind at 2 in the morning when the body is tired and the day is over and there is nothing that requires attention, and the mind generates it anyway. Produces the worry about the conversation from yesterday, runs the scenario for the meeting next week, revisits the decision from 3 years ago that has already been revisited 100 times. Or the mind that cannot be present to the thing it is doing, that is in the conversation but also composing the next email, that is in the dinner table but also running the mental task list, that is, in any meaningful sense of the word, not here, not quite here, not fully here, never, in the ordinary run of the day, completely here. This is Chitta Vritti, the fluctuation of the mind. And it is not a modern problem. Patanjali was describing it 2,000 years ago, which means it has been the condition of human consciousness for at least that long, probably much longer. What is modern is the specific intensity of it, the phone, the notification, the designed interruption of a technology built to prevent the mind from settling, layered on top of the fluctuation that was already there. The Yoga Sutras were not written for the phone era. They were written for the mind, and the mind has not fundamentally changed. Patanjali identifies 5 types of Chitta Vritti, 5 categories of mental fluctuation that, together, constitute the restlessness of the ordinary mind. Correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge, imagination, deep sleep, memory. This list is the most clarifying taxonomy of ordinary mental activity I have encountered anywhere, because it shows, with the precision of a diagnostician who has been studying the patient for a very long time, that the mind is not simply busy, it is busy in specific ways, with specific contents, and understanding which of the 5 you are in, at any given moment, is the beginning of the capacity to work with it, rather than simply being dragged by it. The mind is running a scenario about a future conversation. That is imagination. Vritti number 3. The mind is rehearsing the memory of something that went wrong 2 years ago. That is memory. Vritti number 5. The mind has arrived at a conclusion about a person or a situation that may or may not be accurate. That is either correct knowledge or incorrect knowledge, and the mind, left unexamined, rarely knows which it is holding. The naming does not still the fluctuation, but it creates, for the person who has learned to use it, a moment of distance. The fluctuation and the awareness of the fluctuation are not the same thing, and the moment the awareness steps back far enough to name what the mind is doing, the grip, however briefly, loosens. The Yoga Sutras offer a specific model of the mind, the Antakarana, the inner instrument, that is worth understanding because it changes how you relate to the fluctuations when they arise. Patanjali and the broader Samkhya Yoga tradition distinguish between 3 aspects of the inner instrument: Chitta, the overall field of consciousness, the mind stuff in which the fluctuations arise; Buddhi, the discriminative intelligence, the faculty that can distinguish between what is real and what is merely being imagined; and Ahamkara, the ego, the I-maker, the sense of being a bounded self to whom all the fluctuations belong.
And then, distinct from all 3, Purusha, the pure awareness, the witness, the unchanging presence that is aware of all the fluctuations without being any of them. This distinction between the aware witness and the fluctuating contents of the mind is the practical core of the Yoga Sutras, because most of the suffering that the Chitta Vritti produces comes not from the fluctuations themselves, but from the identification with them, from the conviction that the anxiety is you, that the worry is you, that the rehearsed conversation and the revisited memory and the generated scenario are the self, rather than weather passing through the sky. The Purusha is the sky, the Chitta Vritti is the weather. The practice of yoga, the whole of it, in Patanjali's understanding, is the practice of learning to rest in the sky while the weather passes. The eightfold path of the Yoga Sutras, the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, is the systematic technology for accomplishing this. And I want to name the limbs briefly because most Western yoga students know the physical postures, the 3rd limb, and are unaware that they exist within a much larger framework. The first 2 limbs, the yamas and niyamas, are the ethical foundation: non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, right use of energy, non-grasping, and self-discipline, contentment, purification, self-study, surrender to the larger order. Before any technique, before any posture or breath practice, the quality of the life being lived, which determines whether the subsequent practices have anything to work with. The 3rd limb, asana, the physical posture, not fitness, the stable, comfortable seat in which the mind can be still without the body's discomfort generating a constant source of fluctuation. The 4th, pranayama, the regulation of the breath, the most immediately accessible of all the practices, the breath that can be taken up right now, in this moment, without any prior training, to begin the process of stilling what the unregulated breath perpetually stirs. The 5th through 8th, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, the withdrawal of the senses from their objects, the focusing of attention on a single point, the sustained unbroken flow of that attention, and the absorption, the state in which the fluctuations have stilled completely, and what remains is the awareness that was always there, but that the fluctuations were preventing from being seen. 8 limbs, 2,000 years of systematic refinement, one project, the stilling of the fluctuations so that what is already present can finally be recognized. There's a sutra, the 14th sutra of the first chapter, that I want to stay with because it is the most practically important thing Patanjali says and the one that the modern world most reliably ignores.
He says, "The practice becomes firmly grounded when attended to for a long time, without interruption, with earnestness. For a long time, without interruption, with earnestness. Not try it for 30 days and assess. Not do it when it is convenient. Not maintain the practice until the results arrive and then consolidate around the results. For a long time, without interruption, with earnestness." The Chitta Vritti has been running, in most of us, for 50 or 60 years. The grooves are deep, the patterns are established, the fluctuation has been the default mode of the mind for so long that stillness, when it briefly arrives, feels foreign, suspicious, like something must be wrong. Patanjali does not offer the quick fix, is not promising that the right technique will still the mind in a weekend retreat. He is describing a relationship between the practitioner and the practice, between the awareness and the fluctuations, that develops over time, deepens with consistency, and produces, after long and sincere application, a quality of mind that the person who is not practiced cannot quite imagine, and the person who has cannot quite explain. Now the bridge, because Patanjali was writing for a tradition, the Samkhya Yoga tradition of ancient India, that had a specific metaphysical framework, a specific set of institutional supports, a specific context in which the practice was transmitted and sustained. Most of us are not in that context. Most of us are living the householder life, as the tradition calls it, the life of relationships and work and the ongoing demands of a world that is not organized around the stilling of the mind. But the Chitta Vritti, the fluctuation, the constant commentary, the mind that is never quite here, is in that life, is in fact particularly in that life, because the householder life has more to fluctuate about, more to plan and worry and remember and imagine, more inputs arriving per second than any forest hermitage ever had to manage. The Yoga Sutras do not require the monastery. They require, as Patanjali says, long time, no interruption, earnestness, and a beginning, which is always available right now, which is always one breath away from starting. Here is what the Yoga Sutras ask of you, practically, today. First, take the breath. Pranayama, the regulation of the breath, is the fourth limb. But in practice, it is the doorway, the most immediately accessible of all the practices, available right now, without instruction, without equipment, without prior training. One deliberate breath. Not the habitual, automatic breath that the body takes without asking, a breath that is chosen, that begins with an intention to begin it, that is followed from its beginning to its end, that arrives at its completion and then releases. One breath, in which the mind, the fluctuating, commenting, planning, remembering mind, is given a single object and followed home. Do it now. This is the practice. Everything else is elaboration. Second, name the vritti. Once today, when you notice the mind has left the present moment and gone somewhere, name which of the 5 types of fluctuation it is. Imagination, memory, incorrect knowledge, correct knowledge rehearsed for the 100th time, deep sleep's residue in the waking mind. Just the name, not a judgment, not the beginning of an effort to change it. The simple Patanjali precision act of seeing clearly what is happening, which is itself the beginning of the distance between the awareness and the whether it is watching. Third, establish one consistent practice. Patanjali says, long time without interruption with earnestness. The key word is without interruption. The practice that is inconsistent does not accumulate in the way the consistent practice does not carve the groove, does not build the specific quality of mind that the long and sincere application produces. Choose one thing, not an ambitious program, one thing that can be done every day at the same time for 10 minutes. The breath practice, the sitting, the deliberate pause before the day begins in which the mind is given a single object and the fluctuations are invited to slow. Not perfect, consistent, for a long time, without interruption, with earnestness. Starting today.
Fourth, practice the witness once. The sky and the weather, the Purusha and the Chitta Vritti. The aware witness that is not the fluctuations, but the space in which they occur. Once today, in a moment of difficulty, in a moment when the anxiety or the worry or the rehearsed scenario is running, step back. Not to suppress the fluctuation, to notice that there is a step back available. That the one who is aware of the anxiety is not the anxiety. That the one who notices the worry is not the worry. Sit in that awareness, briefly, imperfectly, for whatever duration is available before the identification reasserts itself, and notice what the sky feels like. What is present in the awareness that is not the weather of the mind's constant movement. That is the Purusha. Always already there, waiting for the fluctuations to still enough to be recognized. I want to close with the third sutra, the one that immediately follows the definition of yoga, the stilling of the fluctuations, and that is, in the tradition, considered the description of what the stilling reveals. Patanjali writes, Tada drashtu svarupe avasthanam. Then the witness rests in its own nature. When the fluctuations still, not permanently, not in some achieved and finalized state, but in the moments of genuine stillness that the practice produces, the witness rests in its own nature. Not doing anything, not achieving anything, not being something different from what it has always been. Simply present. Simply itself. Resting in the awareness that is its own nature, which is the same awareness that has been here all along, behind the fluctuations, waiting with the patience that only something that has never been anywhere else can have. The fluctuations arise and pass. The witness rests.
This is the whole of the practice. This is the whole of the Yoga Sutras. This is what Patanjali was pointing at in 196 sutras, across 4 chapters, in the precise, compressed, deliberately minimal language of a tradition that knew that the thing being pointed at is not something that can be said, only recognized. When the fluctuations still, even briefly, even once, the witness rests in its own nature and knows it has always been home. Here's the question the Yoga Sutras leave us with today. Not from the still mind, from the fluctuating one. From the mind that is reading this right now and is also, somewhere in its background, running 3 other things simultaneously. In the space between one thought and the next, in the gap that is always there if the attention is fine enough to find it, what is present? Not what is thinking, what is aware of the thinking? What is the witness that has been watching the fluctuations this whole time? Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your Patanjali answer, arrived at in the gap rather than the commentary, is not a small thing. It is the sutra. 4 words, the whole of it. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, and what remains when they still is already what you are. I'll see you in the next one.